Hello all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now we're reviewing The Last of Us Season 1, and today we have made it. We are going to be discussing the season finale of this show's first season. So we're on episode 9, titled Look for the Light. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of the episode. Okay. Sarah, kick us off with a summary for this finale.
A pregnant Anna places her trust in a lifelong friend. Later, Joel and Ellie near the end of their journey.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so curious your thoughts about this episode. Okay, well, let's start off with our episode titles of choice for this episode. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is Okay.
That's so crazy. That's mine too.
Yes!
Wow, that's so cool. We've had like variations 2 or 3 times in the past of similar ones, but man, our brains were in the same wavelength.
I mean, you just had to do it. There's so much in that okay that she says.
Yeah.
It just had to be done.
Yeah. Oh, it was great. Wow. Okay, well, let's dive right in. There's much to discuss. Yeah, well, I don't know where to begin other than maybe the high-level review. Like, what did you think about this episode? And then there's lots that happens that I'm sure we'll nitpick and dive into in more detail.
I'm so curious about what you think of this episode, because I struggled with it.
Mm-hmm.
To me, like the pacing of this episode just felt off. And in classic Sarah fashion, I was then going off onto tangents and asking questions that I don't think the show really wanted me to ask those questions. So this episode is very effective in setting up the next season, but I really didn't enjoy how we got there. I think the flashback to Ellie's birth is satisfying to explain why she's immune, but then it brings up a lot of questions for me about Marlene and what her relationship is to Ellie, and more questions about the Fireflies, and like I have questions because like the Marlene and Ellie relationship that we were introduced to in the first episode made sense to me if she was a stranger, but if Ellie is the daughter of Marlene's friend who died, that just leads me to have a lot of questions about this. And then the whole, like, we need to essentially kill Ellie to get the cure thing is interesting. But I'm also just like, does that make sense? Like, are you going to go straight to we need to murder this child for a cure? We go from no cure to murdering a child for maybe a cure. Like, there feels like there should be some steps in there. Isn't there some sciencey stuff that we can do before we get to murdering a child? And then the whole time I was just like, why couldn't we just have a conversation? Like, why couldn't... I mean, no child should choose this. She's obviously not old enough to make an informed decision about this. But I don't know. Let's talk about it. I know it's a revolutionary concept, but like, I don't know, instead of manipulating this dude to transport this child across the country and then drugging her so that she's asleep to be murdered, I don't know. That whole thing was just so weird to me. And then I do appreciate the ending because obviously that sets up tension for the relationship going into season 2, and like all of that is good and interesting and all of that, but there was just a lot in this episode where I was like, what are we doing? But that might just be me, because sometimes I get caught up on things that you're not supposed to get caught up in. So what did you think of this episode?
I hated a lot of this episode.
Oh, I feel so much better. Okay.
Yeah. Pretty much the whole first half I hated. And then the second half, I like this place that we ended up in. I just think we couldn't do this journey for where we ended up by the end of this episode in one episode. I think we needed more time to arrive at this kind of descent into a pretty cynical view, honestly, of the capacity of human nature. We've been talking about this show being really beyond, on the surface, it's a thriller, apocalyptic thriller with infected fungus zombies, but much more so, I think it's a meditation on human nature and what happens to us when we are pressed into these desperate headspaces where survival and protection for those that we care for, really, the volume of that is ratcheted up to like 1,000%, right? And I love that the show has essentially Harvey Dent view of the world. I was thinking after this episode ended of that line from Harvey in The Dark Knight: you either die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain. And I kind of love that Joel is not immune to all of the tendencies we may have as human beings to take that protective side of us that loves deeply and take it too far and really kind of betray trust by lying to Ellie out of his own desperation to maybe redeem some of those wounds that he's experienced. Like, I love that the show honestly took a much darker turn and much more cynical turn than I even expected to. I just think we couldn't have gotten there that quickly. He basically gets stabbed and then wakes up a completely different person in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of seeds that have been planted along the way. I just think it was too much, too fast. And it was interesting to think about the whole trajectory of the season now with the information that we have as one giant kidnapping for this young girl that is trusted the wrong person, and now she's being lied to, and she now has emotional investment that he's manipulated her in. Granted, that's not actually what happens, because I think a lot of the bonds that were formed between the two of them are very true and pure and good. But by the second half of this episode, I'm concerned for her safety. I'm you are no longer safe. And for so much of the season, Joel was that pillar of safety for her. So it's just fascinating to think about so much of our conversation that we had around the contrasts and differences between David and Joel in episode 8, and how twisted David is and whatnot, and how great Joel has been in his protectiveness. But, maybe I need to eat my words a little bit. Joel is arguably shady in a different way, and not too dissimilar from David, because at least David was clear and upfront in what his intentions were, and honest in a lot of ways. And Joel's emotional manipulation, I think, is problematic in a very different way. So my feelings towards Joel have definitely shifted. Granted, there's a lot of rapport that we've built with him over the course of the season. So we understand where he's coming from. He's operating out of wounds. He's operating out of hurt and out of this desperation to right his past wrongs that he's been carrying the guilt for. I get it. But my loyalty is with Ellie, and I'm concerned for her safety.
Well, and I think this episode provides an interesting contrast between Marlene and Joel. Yeah. Because we learn that Marlene hatched this kidnapping plot in order to murder this child. And we learn of that. And then we see by the end of the episode that essentially Joel has done the same thing, not to murder the child, but in order to keep her alive. But both of them have discarded her agency and her ability to make choices about her life. Granted, she is a child, so there's some limitations there. But it's so interesting that Marlene is seen as this villain almost in this she really is a villain because she hatched a kidnapping plot. But then by the end, you're oh my gosh, Joel is the same person. And so that creates some complexity, which I do appreciate, that being kind of the launching point to get us into season 2. And that mistrust between him and Ellie, I think, is a really interesting thing after this whole season has been about them building trust and building this bond. And now in a second, Joel destroyed all of that. So I agree with you that that's a really interesting place to end up. I also agree that we got there very quickly because, like, Joel got stabbed at the end of episode 6, I believe, because in episode 7 was the flashback episode. And then episode 8, Ellie was primarily on her own, just doing stuff. So for 2 episodes, we haven't seen much of Joel. And then in this episode, we see him again. And all of a sudden, Ellie is like a stand-in for Sarah. And Ellie has basically been adopted in Joel's mind as his daughter.
Weird.
And I'm like, I get it. Near-death experience. That could change your perspective on a lot of things. But we got there really quickly. Because I think it was in episode 6 where he called her cargo.
Yeah.
So we got from cargo to daughter way too quickly for me. I was like, who is this person? What are we doing?
Yeah. Well, that's the only way that I can explain this in my head is like he's just, juiced up on drugs and he's woken up a completely different person. That's the only way it makes sense in my brain is, because even in I hated the first half of this episode because neither of those 2 characters, like Ellie is maybe a little bit more understandable, but Joel is like a completely different character. Like everything that they do feels so wrong for who we knew them to be. And especially having just experienced in episode 8, all of the things that they just have been through together, to jump so quickly to Joel trying to make small talk and like offering to like teach her how to play the guitar. And like he's asking to have the puns read to him. Like it feels like such a different shift in this kind of gruff but sweet way of him saying like, I want to hear the puns, but I'm not gonna like say it outright. Now he's like this big warm softy and she's the one that's standoffish. Like we know that time has passed, but also I think that for the viewers, episode 8 is fresh in our minds, and so to see how much their dynamic is totally flipped and they aren't behaving like we know them to be was really jarring. So I don't know if there was like an intentional thought of like they just went through this near-death experience, therefore like so much has changed in their dynamic and we're just supposed to zoom ahead with these characters for like months later. But for me, it was too soon for me. I was like, we just experienced a huge explosive ending in episode 8 and now none of these 2 humans I feel like I know.
Yeah. And the way that I read it was that Ellie was still like really shut down because of the trauma of the previous episode. So then Joel was trying to like get her to be herself again. But I totally agree with you. It did not work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, who are these 2 people? Like, I understand Ellie being shut down and reserved and all of that and kind of lost in her own world. That makes sense. I don't know. I struggled to believe Joel doing those things to try and get her out of that.
Well, and then him also saying like, let's forget about the whole mission and just go back to Tommy's. I don't think that's right for the character. And then also, Ellie so clearly communicating to him in that conversation where they just have seen the giraffes. And she says like, after all I've done, it's got to be worth something. Okay, I can understand that. That makes sense. Maybe a little bit soon. Like we expect her to have to process through a lot to get to that point, but that's fine. But then she says, I'll follow you anywhere you go. And I'm like, first of all, that's a bold statement to make. Second of all, that character that we know doesn't communicate like that. You know what I mean? That's also something that, like, to share that is so vulnerable and huge that we know Ellie would share that in a much more clever and kind of like less direct way, but really kind of also insinuating and communicating that. But it's also awkward to communicate that way and be like, I'll follow you wherever you want to go. And so that's just not how she communicates either. So It was all so weird. There's so many like big, vulnerable things that they both say to each other that I'm like, these two don't communicate like that. Human beings don't in general, let alone these two that have had so many walls up and also have built a rapport where they can banter and communicate what they need to without saying it so on the nose. I just hated all of that.
Yeah, and I think it's all just too fast too.
Yeah.
You know, the previous, I guess, 6 episodes that we see these two together, it's been such a slow build of their relationship and them starting to bond and them starting to trust each other and letting those walls down little by little. And I think that that's the brilliance of the show, is it just feels so human. We don't immediately trust people. We take some time to warm up to them and let them in on these very, very vulnerable parts of us. And so then to just jump ahead to them being like, I'm going to just bare my whole soul to you and it's totally fine. It's like, nope, it's not it. And so if I don't know, I think it was kind of a missed opportunity, and maybe there just wasn't enough episodes left, you know, because we did just suffer a giant trauma in episode 8. There's a lot of feelings, there's a lot of issues, there's a lot there to explore. So maybe they just didn't have the time to get into that hard emotional stuff. But man, I almost wish that they both would have just been reserved and like, I don't know, maybe more closed off to each other again. Maybe it's a returning to like how they were in episode 1 almost, just because of everything they've been through that they don't quite have the language to process. I think I would have believed that a little bit more than this really happy, glossy, rosy version of these two that we got.
Yes, agreed, 100%, which makes me think about like the pacing and overall structure of the season, where maybe episode 8 events needed to have happened earlier, you know? And so there's breathing time, there's runway to have this mending and building of rapport after something so traumatic be kind of challenging at first, and maybe Ellie shut down and Joel's really trying, but then maybe Joel's processing his own things and he's, you know, responding in really funky ways. And then they are able to arrive at this moment of like trust and bond that have deepened. But we basically skip all of that and do like a fast cut into the future, which I just think maybe the show thought that we could catch up and just fill in the gaps ourselves. But I actually think that the aftermath of episode 8 and watching these two characters go through the work of processing through that together, it being really messy, them maybe hurting each other even more sometimes, and then ultimately choosing each other would have been really meaningful. So maybe we needed another like episode or 2 to breathe, have that breathe a little bit more, and then we get this big moment in episode 9. And also maybe it's more believable for us of like Joel's feeling of connection to her, and maybe we begin to see signs of it turning a little twisted and a little too extreme. And then we also see Ellie's processing through and then arriving at feeling that willingness to follow Joel everywhere. Like we would just believe what they're saying a little bit more, because I'm like, this is weird. And the other thing that made that whole section and sequence really odd is they go from like emotionally vulnerable, bearing their soul moment after moment after moment within quick succession. And I'm also like, this is not how human beings communicate either. You know, like we do a little emotional moment and then we quickly need to like have some fun little banter or something to like ease the tension of that, the feelings of that, of how scary that is. And then maybe we're ready again. It's something that we talked about a ton of the bear doing really well. Like there's this really sweet connected moment. And then someone makes a joke or makes each other laugh so that you can get back to like, okay, we're on our journey again, or get back to, you know, baseline where we're not just bearing our souls 24/7 together.
I'm sorry, you don't want that just all the time on a constant loop, just all the feels.
Hearing all of my most vulnerable things. Yeah, I don't live my life that way, and I would love to meet anyone that does. But you know what, Sarah? You know what's missing is we didn't have a near-death experience. That's what we needed.
It's true.
That's what we needed.
It's true.
Yeah. I mean,
but like, so the
I'm thinking back to when we reviewed True Detective Night Country, and we had that same thought about, I think it was Danvers, who like near-death experience, and Navarro saves her, and then all of a sudden she is like a whole different human person. Full transformation.
A whole new you. And I mean, it's true. Neither of us have had a near-death experience. So like, I don't know what it's like to come back on that. Maybe you do have a whole different outlook on life and you're a totally different person. And like, totally cool. Love that. Make it make sense in the story.
Yeah.
Because again, we don't get any of that.
Oh,
we see the flashback to how Ellie was born, and then immediately we're dropped into this with Joel being happy and cheesing and all the things. And there's no explanation of how we got from the end of episode 8 to this new and improved Joel. And we needed that. We needed it to make sense. And it doesn't make sense the way that it currently is.
Yeah. I was getting major ick with Joel by the end of this episode. Like that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Hike where he's going on and on about Sarah. I'm like, this is actually really creepy. You know? He's like just rambling on. He's like, not to say the two of you are the same. Also, he makes some really like, I'm not a big fan of your comments where he's like, she's a lot more girly, but not saying that you're not girly. I'm like, what is going on? It's the drugs, Sarah. That's the only way this makes sense and the only way I can continue to invest in this character. It's the drugs.
I see. Okay, so so maybe. Okay,
stab
maybe.
Wound. You know, near-death stab wound. You need a lot of drugs to make sure you can, like, I don't know, take 3 people out, travel for 3 months.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the penicillin is actually air quotes penicillin, and it's drugs. We don't know what David gave Ellie that Ellie stabbed into Joel, but it had the effect of giving him superhuman strength and then completely changed his personality. So whatever drugs do that, that is what he got. And maybe, because we didn't see what happened after they gave that really cathartic hug at the end of episode 8, maybe Joel was like, hey man, that is some good stuff. And he went and he raided the pharmacy on the cult compound and got all the drugs. And now he's just high as a kite all the time, having a good time.
I like that. I like that a lot. This is very good.
We got it.
That makes sense. Because I was cutting to our previous conversation where I was gushing on and on about how great that cathartic hug was and how, oh my God, yes, we needed the safety of Pedro Pascal. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, we are not safe. We need to run. Ellie, we gotta run. Girl, you are. Well, the other thing that's really great about this episode, which is, we'll praise, is the show trusts Ellie. Her intuition is screaming red alert, and she knows it. And even when he swears at the end of the episode that he didn't lie and he's telling the truth, her okay and her facial expression insinuate like she doesn't believe him. So I love how much the show has put so much faith in Ellie's intuition, her survival instincts, her emotional intelligence, and that I think is going to be really fascinating to see because she is not satisfied.
Oh, yeah, no. Ellie is not having any of this foolishness. Joel thinks that he is serving all this up to her, and she can spot BS a million miles away. So you can see her guard coming back up the more that Joel talks. And she's like, no, you're lying to me. This is not right. So I think, again, that is the part of the episode that I think is so interesting, is that it brilliantly and subtly sets up that wedge between these two characters that will then be explored in the next season. So I think that that's really, really smart. And just way to go, Ellie. She has such a great BS meter, and it has served her well yet again.
Yes, absolutely. And then here's the problem. is that her BS meter is strong. So she's aware of what's going on. But there's also that desire that she's expressed of wanting to build connection and be in relationship with people, and the need for community and to belong, and her fear of being alone. And when those two things, fight against each other, like, it's easy for us to, delude ourselves into believing that maybe we're just reading too much to it. Maybe it's my paranoia kicking in again. Like, and so I think that's going to be so fun to see in her character growth, of her deep down knowing the truth, but then that desire for relationship and the emotional connection she's built will, I think, override for a while at least, and to kind of push that thought away out of the desire for maintaining this relationship with this person that you've literally survived so much with and have built such an emotional investment in. It's inevitable that, like, I think her intuition will triumph, but I think there's going to be a period of time where that battle will be fought within her, and the temptations of being ignorant and being deluded are strong too.
Yeah, that's going to be really fascinating to see how they explore that in the next season for sure.
Yep. Okay. Other big things that we wanted to mention that happened in this episode.
I hated the flashback. I hated it so much.
Tell me why.
Because it doesn't make sense to me.
I hate it too.
Like, I don't know, man. Because if we're going to see Ellie's birth, and that Marlene then was entrusted with Ellie, what happened in those 14 years? Like, this is what I need to know. And then, like, was Marlene just, like, chilling, waiting? Like, she had an eye on Ellie, was just keeping track on her, and was like, oh my gosh, she got bit, finally. So now we can kidnap her. Like, what? This doesn't make sense to me. And, like,
why wait so long?
Right. It doesn't make sense. And so then she's already 14. You've already been twiddling your thumbs for 14 years. I don't know. Let's wait a few more years so that you can actually maybe, like, have a conversation with her about, hey, you know what? You have a superpower. And I think you can help us come up with a cure. Let's do some sciencey stuff. And then do some sciencey things short of murder. And then, if murder is the only option, then have that conversation once she's of age and can make this sacrificial choice. I don't understand. This whole episode could have just been a conversation. And we could have just had a conversation and it would have been over.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't have to go on this whole journey. We didn't have to murder all of the fireflies. We could have just talked about some things and solved the problem.
Yeah, we could have, but instead we just take things into our own hands. I love the idea that this episode introduces around, like, who gets to decide who lives and dies. That's really interesting. Like, and Joel and Marlene have a very explicit conversation around, like, Joel is essentially saying she is uninformed about what is about to happen to her. That's not okay. But then Marlene throws it back into his face, which also makes sense too, of, like, it's not for you to decide that thousands of people that might be able to benefit from the cure also are now denied that opportunity. So the like moral gray area of, like, utilitarianism versus Kantianism is really interesting, that I think is kind of explored here. And on top of that, we also see Joel in this really well shot and well scored sequence taking fireflies out, like, left and right. And so there's a wake of death that he is responsible for, and he has chosen that they have gotten to decide, or he's getting to decide if they live or die. So he spares the two nurses that are in the operating room, but he takes a whole bunch of the guards out. And now Joel has, like, put himself in the position of being able to decide the life or death of all of these fireflies, that some of them are begging for for mercy. Some of them are choosing to like lay down their weapons, and he still just like takes them out cold. And so I thought that concept was really cool that was introduced in this episode. But again, I think we needed more time to sit with the ideas there, and so maybe like more time with Marlene and her ideology, twisted as it may be, but like she's got her sense of logic and reasoning for what she's doing. And I don't think it's as black and white. Neither of those two characters are black and white. And I think that's really fun. But we also don't get that much time to sit with all of that.
And the other thing that I just kept thinking about is there's possibly a shortage of doctors in the world here. And we're just taking doctors out. Like, what? I mean, granted, there's only one in this, but like, he seemed like he potentially knew some things about science and how this fungus works. And we're just taking him out. We're taking all these other dudes out. Like, I don't know. Again, is there another option here? Like, you just went on a whole murder spree and then kidnapped a child because Marlene was a kidnapper who wanted to murder a child. Like, I don't know. I struggled with it. And like you were talking about, it's a really interesting concept to explore that morality and tying into the larger themes of the season about humanity and how we respond when we're put into, the most extreme circumstances. What do we do when push comes to shove? Like, all of that is really interesting. But you already said it. We have no time to think about this. We have no time to explore any of these things. So my alternate pitch for the ending of this season is episode 8. And then we could make this episode 9 into like a multi-episode arc that happens in season 2. And we could have like little detours and side quests and all of the things, because we don't have enough time in this episode to explore everything that the show wants us to be able to explore.
Yes, I like that a lot. And I think it would also give us more time with Marlene. I think it's so easy to view her as the villain because obviously she's proposing that we're going to like murder this young girl and the girl doesn't know about it. Like, that's very problematic. I'm not by no means saying that is a good idea nor a moral idea. But the concept of the masses that she's thinking about plays into her logic and her reasoning. And so she's like a lot of the characters that we've met along the way, where she's had to make choices and trade-offs that, like, from another perspective are highly problematic. But as a viewer of the show, obviously we are highly invested in Ellie. So when Marlene says like, hey, we're gonna take her out and she doesn't know about it, like, yes, we are up in arms around it, but it's not as simple as that. And I thought that the whole side quest that we go on with Henry and his choice to betray Kathleen's brother to save Sam, like we are obviously aligned with Henry and we see that Kathleen's methods are problematic. Therefore, that feels like it shakes out clear to us. But it is very morally gray, and our loyalties very much skew our perception of what is or isn't right. And I would be so intrigued to see that version that you shared, where we get to see more of Marlene really trying to think about this scenario and some of the feelings she has, knowing that she's made this promise to Ellie's mother, like all of that's so interesting. And we just rush through it. So more time in a few more episodes would have made that really, really interesting to think about, that the emotional weight of like how much Marlene sees what she's doing very clearly, but is ultimately still making that choice out of her desire to protect, like, in her mind, the world and thousands and millions of people that could benefit from this. Like, that's some interesting headspaces to have it and think about.
But instead we
we
get
rush.
Chef Boyardee and Boggle and giraffes.
Yep. Yeah. I hated the giraffe
Excellent.
sequence too. I mean, I get its role in the episode. I just think it wasn't the right choice right after episode 8. So once again, perhaps your proposal where episode 8 is the finale, and then we get time to like, oh my gosh, big explosive ending. What will happen with these two? That's your cliffhanger. And then a year passes, the new season comes out, and we start months into the future. It's easier for us to swallow that. But going right from episode 8 into 9, and then we get really sweet giraffes, and Ellie's like giggling, and it's really sweet. But I'm like, we just experienced so much, y'all, in like just literally minutes ago from the ending of episode 8.
I'm not gonna lie. I would love to feed a giraffe. That would be so cool. I was like, Ellie, you do what you gotta do, my girl. But my question is, they're in Utah.
Yeah.
It snows in Utah. Do giraffes do snow? Would they be okay in this climate? And I did no researching of this. I was just confused the whole time. I was like, how are there giraffes here? And how are they okay? But it would be really cool to feed a giraffe. So that's kind of where I ended up.
Oh, it was very, very cute. Very sweet.
But it is wrong for the character. And it felt weird in this episode. That whole middle chunk where they're just shooting the breeze and having these like touchy-feely moments.
Touching giraffes.
Also, after the giraffes, when they're in that like open area around the hospital, Joel has no situational awareness.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, what are you doing? Like, do you not remember that you were just stabbed 2 episodes ago?
Yep.
Did you, like, have you forgotten that like people are after you? What are you doing?
Yep.
Oh, I'm so annoyed.
Well, when she's running up the stairs the whole time, I was nervous for her.
Yes.
You know? I was like, oh, this is not going to end well. And it doesn't. But we get a whole slew of weird stuff that happens in the middle. So it's the drugs. That's the only way this makes sense. That's what I'm holding on to.
Of course, it's the drugs.
It's what I'm holding on to for the sake of my relationship with this character. Because he gets real weird. I hated the hike scene. I'm going to come back to this and rant about it for a hot second.
Yeah, it's so bad.
It's so bad. It's already so bad that he's lied that I think the show didn't need to give us the whole hike sequence. Like, we get it. He's implied that when he says like, it wasn't time that did it, after she says was it time that heals all wounds, and he's looking at her adoringly. I'm like, okay, we get it. This is really weird. Like, you have an unhealthy attachment to this young girl now, and I am concerned for her safety. So I just don't think we needed any of the hike conversation. We already have a complicated relationship with Joel with his lies. We don't need him to just be real weird and fuel the ick that I already have for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think the purpose of that conversation, I think, is more to just reinforce Ellie's
intuition.
I don't know, growing mistrust, maybe, or her growing discomfort around him, and kind of that tension that you talked about between wanting to belong, but then also realizing that this person that you trusted is actually not trustworthy. I think that that's what that like conversation is seeding, but I don't know, man. Maybe there was another way to do that. That was better, because I hated it. And maybe we're supposed to. Maybe we're like, all of that discomfort and grossness that we feel, maybe that was intentional from the show, because that's probably what Ellie was feeling in that moment too.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah, that's probably accurate in that, like, we were supposed to feel all the things that we're feeling. I think it just would have been more powerful for it to be more subtle, and for her to have picked up on it and has sensed the shift that has happened, and maybe not just like barreled it over our heads. Like, we get it. He sees her as the daughter. It's very clear already.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt
just
too on
too
the
quick.
nose, like the whole first half too.
And so maybe that's the issue, is they just didn't have enough time to make it subtle. And so they had to squeeze all of this in here. So it had to be on the nose because there wasn't time to do it in a nuanced, methodical way.
Mm-hmm. Or just have him like talk longingly about Sarah without like directly comparing the two of them. Like, that's weird. Like, he can speak longingly about all the memories that he had with her and whatnot, but he's literally like, well, she's a little bit more reserved than you, but she's also like more girly, but like not saying that you're girly, but then also like not saying that you're not, like whatever. It's just like, ew.
Yeah, it's not great. Joel from episode 8 was like riding high. He was our hero. We're big fans of Joel. And now, nah.
Yeah.
He is on the bad list. He cannot pass go. He cannot collect $200. Like, no.
Yep. We're
done with you.
And then you just
Which is really impressive to get us there that quickly.
Yeah, honestly. That's very true. They really feel the ick real fast. And it's the words from Maria in episode 6 or 7, where Maria says, like, be careful who you trust, because it's the people that trust that can betray you. We're like, ooh, that's reverberating around in my brain now, like she's onto something. And I think the show has planted so many seeds, insinuating all of the things that Joel's done in the past. But it always felt more like it was out of self-protection and he took innocent lives. Okay, we've seen him do that a gajillion times in the season already. So I didn't think twice about it, but it really casts a shadow on, what does Maria know that we don't know, about things that Tommy's told her, and beyond just the self-protection for his flock going extreme, but like emotional manipulation. Like, what else has Joel done that we just don't know about? So I think that there's new, fresh clarity that we might uncover about some of the words that Maria has shared with Ellie.
And I do appreciate how this episode reframes that conversation, because up to that point, we had been spending time with Joel. We know that he's done some bad things in his past, but we trust his character. And then we get this woman that we've never met before who is like, don't trust him. And so we're immediately skeptical of her because we have such a rapport with Joel. And now it's like, oh, wait, she was right, maybe. Oh, no. So I'm hoping that we see more of her in season 2, and maybe she can have a little, like, I was right, I told you so kind of party going on. That would be satisfying.
Yeah. And, the other way to think about this is like, is this also perhaps the genius of the show, in that we, like Ellie, have been kind of intoxicated by this trust that we've put in him as well, and how quickly that can feel like it's broken in an instant. There's maybe something there too around like our natural human desire as viewers of a show to just get invested in a character that we feel like we've built connection with, and how delicate and fragile trust is maybe the uber meta thesis that the show's making. And it's done it in a way that feels like it's rushed storytelling, but I'm like, the way that I feel about Joel has flipped so quickly that I'm like, man, that's fascinating to think about even within ourselves, because I think sometimes we can quickly justify so much for a character that we love, even if they're a terrible character. We're like, but no, like, we just love to see them, even though we know they're problematic. And for the show to do it in this way is kind of fascinating. Like, our journey with Joel has mirrored Ellie's journey with Joel in a lot of ways.
So we are with you, Ellie. We don't trust him anymore either. And we just want you to be safe, girl. So whatever you got to do to make sure that you're safe,
yep,
go ahead and do it.
Yep.
Just keep that radar up.
Yep. It's genius for her to wake up in the back seat of his car after being passed out.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Just body strewn in the back seat, because I'm like, this is actually legit peak kidnap visual.
Right?
You don't even have your clothes. You're in a hospital gown and you wake up like plopped in the backseat of this man that quote unquote rescued you actually just kidnapped you.
Yeah.
Noted.
Well, and is there a more vulnerable and uncomfortable and exposing thing to wear than a hospital gown?
Yeah.
Like, that's awful. Just absolutely terrible. So, yes, let's not be in the back of this dude's car in a hospital gown. Let's do something else. Let's fix this problem.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Okay, any other last big things we want to mention before we give out some TVNS awards?
You know, in our last episode, you mentioned Joel wanting Joel to take a page out of John Wick's book.
Yeah.
And we saw that in this episode, but he took the wrong page. And so I just kept thinking about that as he was just like murdering fireflies. I was like, oh, he listened to Jen, but he did the wrong thing. We wanted him to be more human, not to be a really, really talented murderer. Got it. Okay, so maybe next time we have to be a little bit more specific.
But see, unfortunately, he wanted to be more like John Wick, but the score really is not giving cool heavy metal beat, rock, like, oh, this is really cool that we're taking people out. It's this like mournful strings of like tragic swells, and I'm like, oh, he's like halfway John Wick, but without the cool, sexy track to make it seem really awesome and badass. Nope, we're like, oh no, this is really bad. Lots of people are dying. Instead of in John Wick, we're like, hell yeah. But yeah, so his John Wick transformation went in the wrong direction and only halfway.
Yeah, that section when he's taking everybody out is almost filmed like a war movie. Like, that's what that reminded me of in the score too. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a war battle, except it's not. It's one dude just murdering all of these other dudes.
Yep.
Like, that's not quite the same thing that we have going on here. So that was, again, like a weird like dissonance for me in this episode. And I was like, okay, this is very well done. But also I am not feeling emotionally what the show wants me to feel emotionally in this moment. So it just felt weird.
And I think the show is also asking us to think about all of the other times that Joel has taken people out, and out of protectiveness for him and Ellie, who I'm invested in, I'm like, all right, great. Like, they're safe. Like, like there's a threat and they've taken out the threat. But this sequence is shot very differently. We get a whole close-up of a man bleeding out that Joel's taken out, and so the show is kind of prompting us to think about like our loyalties to these protagonists have blinded me for sure. And when you really zoom out to think about it, like all of those people that Joel's been taking out are human beings and lives that have been lost. And I think the show's been leading us there, especially with the way that we get to see that the person that Joel killed is the girl's father in episode 8. And so the show's kind of inviting us to think from another angle all of a sudden. And some of the close-up shots of the people that he's taken out, just bleeding out or in the hallways and whatnot, is, I think, really shifting our sense of understanding of what has actually happened. And yeah, that is very smart of the show to do. I really appreciated that.
All right. Not Team Joel anymore. Only Team Ellie.
Yeah. And well, I guess we'll get to this when we get to our looking ahead section. So I'll save a little bit of it. Let's give out some awards because we'll have, I'm sure, lots to share about what we're hoping to see in the next season. The first category is Scrappiest Survivor. What is your choice for this award?
I would like to give it to the giraffe for surviving in Utah.
Yeah, that was my choice too, is the giraffes for surviving in not their chosen environment and natural habitat. I don't understand.
I also don't understand. Like, it's a very cool visual. I would like to feed a giraffe. That's amazing. But also, it doesn't make sense. It's fine.
Yep.
It's just a TV show, but it doesn't make sense, and I am bothered.
Like, it looks very whimsical and cool. You know, like, of all of the animals, giraffes are a really cool one to do, especially her whole sequence of, like, running up the stairs and getting to feed it, like, at eye level, right up top of the building. It's a really cool concept. Don't make sense for Utah. Salt Lake City, Utah? Are you kidding me? They've got harsh winters there. These are dire conditions. But I don't know. Maybe the fungus has changed the environment entirely. We don't know.
Oh.
Although
maybe that's it. Maybe.
No, that doesn't make so much sense.
Maybe.
Well, because in Wyoming, they were just in Wyoming, and it was like full-on snow.
I'm so confused. Whatever. It's fine. It's not important,
No.
but
But
it doesn't make sense.
That's funny. They are the scrappiest survivor, though.
Maybe they do giraffes migrate? Do they go, maybe they go south for the winter or something? You know, they spend their winters in Tucson and then they come back up to Utah in the summer or something.
Well,
they have their summer home and their winter home, you know, as they do.
The humans are becoming very different in this post-apocalyptic world. Then I guess giraffes can do whatever they want to. They can change themselves as well. So yeah,
so you're
anything
saying
goes.
that giraffes can change their spots.
Oh, I don't know. They've just chosen to keep them because they're like, these look really cool. We're not giving these up. We have the option to. We've tried it on, and we feel that this is a better option for ours.
Which is fair.
Yeah, because
they looked great. Aesthetics are important.
Matters in moments of dire conditions. So
it's true. It's true.
The next category is grittiest moment. What is your choice?
Giving birth during the apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, also giving birth while fighting off an infected being.
Yeah, dude.
I had some questions about how this baby just like seemingly slipped out of her. And also,
right?
Isn't it supposed to be very bloody? Like, why is it not bloody? I don't know, but it's fine. We don't want to actually see that, so it makes sense. But this thing, I have questions.
But also, if you know a woman, if you know a mom, just be nice to her.
Yes.
Do something nice for her. Because even if a mom hasn't given birth during the apocalypse, she's given birth. And that's rough.
Yep.
So just be nice. Do something nice for your mom today.
Yes. Yes, indeed. My choice for grittiest moment is the mountain of lies that Joel is building his kingdom on. That's rough. He's digging himself quite a hole.
Very rough.
So.
Yeah.
It's
not great.
He's come up with so many, too, because she's like, oh, cool. If there's so many other kids there, then, like, why am I in a hospital gown? And then he comes up with this whole thing of, like, oh, raiders came, so that's why I had to leave. And you're like, well, this don't add up. But, all right, you're digging yourself a real deep hole. The next category is Straight Shooter Award. What is your choice?
I'm going to give it to our favorite villain, Joel, who says, before shooting a dude, I don't have time for this.
Yes. Nice. That is, yeah, you don't have time. I get it. You got to take people out, apparently. My choice for this award is to Marlene when she says to her crew, he tries anything, shoot him. So the clear instructions, clear commands.
Heck yeah. And no one took her advice.
They tried.
No one did what she said.
They tried.
They did.
Yeah.
But no one was a match for drugged up Joel.
He really is a superhero. Or the villain. I don't know. Harvey.
Ooh.
Harvey Dent.
Yeah.
Wise words.
He shot up with some penicillin, watched John Wick, and was ready to go.
Yeah. Okay, looking ahead to season 2, I'm curious what you're excited to see.
I would like to see Ellie just safe, making good choices with her life, discovering that she can make a difference in the world, and maybe making a friend.
Okay.
Like, can Ellie move on from Joel is kind of where I'm at.
Ah.
It's like, because obviously there's a wedge there, and the wedge will probably just continue to get wider once she is able to, like, accept that he has lied to her. So I want her to find belonging in a place that is safe. And a person that is safe. And clearly Joel has become unsafe.
Yep.
And that's where I'm at.
Okay. So we are here. We are Team Ellie through and through. I am excited to see how this wedge becomes kind of laid out on the table clearly between the two of them, because they're kind of both in delusion right now, which is fine. I guess it makes sense. We do that as humans a lot. And I think that they both are intuitive enough to know exactly what's happening, but they just aren't maybe ready to confront that and slash feel deeply connected to each other. Therefore, they're willing to set that aside for now, though I think the sinking feeling will continue to grow in both of them. And I'm just curious to see how that plays out in their connection, because there's a version of this where we've seen Joel really reflect on, and he said some terrible things in the past and can apologize well and recover from them. So, like, will he choose to divulge? Will Ellie have to find it out somehow from somebody else? In which case, I think that further deepens the betrayal there. But, you know, it's going to play out so differently if Joel willingly chooses to come clean, and how there's still hope for that trust to be restored or reconciled in some way, versus if he continues to dig himself deeper into this very dark hole of lies that he's come up with himself, and Ellie has to find out another way. And I think the depths of that betrayal would be far deeper for her. So the other aspect of this is Ellie also now knows so much of Joel's past and some of the pain and trauma that he's went through. So while the anger may be there, as it rightfully should be when she first finds out, like, how will her heart be swayed sometimes based on understanding how he's wired and his wounds, and her having experienced wounds too, and the opportunity for empathy there. The show is so interesting because it's so cynical in a lot of ways and non-hopeful in a lot of ways, but also has shown us some of the best parts of humanity too. So, like, where will it choose to lean into, and kind of, well, where will it choose to say, like, no, sometimes people suck too. And I think that will be fun to see where it makes some of those trade-offs, and giving us kind of a balanced picture of all of the sides of what we're capable of.
Because it's interesting thinking about this episode as the season finale, and kind of what does this say about the show as a whole and the season as a whole. And it's a real downer. So
yeah,
like, we've seen very, very bad parts of humanity, even in those that we've come to really see as the protagonist. So we're ending on a real dark note, despite the really happy, upbeat music that we got for most of the episode.
Yep.
So what else of humanity are we going to explore in the next season?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where I really appreciate the show, is that it is unafraid to give us a sobering view of reality and of truth. And its thesis, it seems to be in this first season, is that no one is immune from the temptations and the desperation that may make us make really bad choices, but also we have the power to decide, and we can choose to be self-sacrificial and to be the best of ourselves, of what we're capable of. And all of that is accessible to us. It's just the choices for us to decide. And I think that's such a balanced and sobering and accurate portrayal of what we have within our means to show up in the world with as human beings. And it's not a overly rosy picture of there's heroes and villains, and there's people like Joel that maybe are like so incredible and aspirational and how they've showed up. But now like they are susceptible just as much. And so it's neat because we start the season with so much hopefulness. We see the sacrifice from Tess. We see this beautiful love story between Frank and Bill. And yet I think the show ends with like some of the worst sides of what we're capable of as humans. And that's really interesting to see. So we start off almost like real positive in the season with some of the choices that characters make. And then we end with some descents into chaos.
Descent into chaos. Yep. That is exactly what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. We're fine. Everything is fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is our review of the season finale of The Last of Us. Season 1, you can find available to stream on Max. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TVNS. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through The Last of Us Season 1. And in fact, we've arrived at the end of our journey of Season 1, but our journey with The Last of Us overall is set to continue, which will be very exciting. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about this finale of this season. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at TVNSPod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back soon with some new updates and info and insight on what we might be covering next here on TVNS. So rest assured, we've got lots more to come with what we'll be covering, which we're excited about. But in the meantime, we hope you have an awesome week, and we'll talk again with you soon and ready to embark on our next journey with a whole new show together soon.